I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors who make events like this possible. They are the key to building and amplifying the movement that will rewire the tech and venture capital industry while creating camaraderie among women, allies we need to move forward. And at this point, I would love to introduce our moderator for today, Judene Small, originally from Clarendon, Jamaica. She has worked as Director of Operations and Chief Strategy Officer for venture-backed startups and has a wealth of experience developing and executing strategic growth plans for various startups and VCs to drive growth. She is currently the COO and co-founder of Roots X Wing, a digital media company focused on highlighting the stories and identities of young Black girls and Black people. And her mission statement is simple: do all you can while you can to create, improve, and sustain positive generational changes for your community. Please help me welcome Judene.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Marion. As she mentioned, I try to approach life very simply, and that is my mantra from my dad: do all you can while you can to improve your community and to also uplift. I'm happy to be a part of the All Race community, serving as a steering committee member for the Los Angeles Steering Committee, as well as in other volunteer and operational roles. And in addition to my role as COO and co-founder of Roots and Wings, a digital media company that's highlighting the stories and missions of Black teen girls, femmes, and non-binary individuals from the age of 13 to 20. I am also the managing partner and founder of a marketing strategy and operations consultancy called CHIENET. And as you can tell, I'm very, very passionate about tech. I'm very passionate about women in tech, women founders, women entrepreneurs, and in general, how women and people of color can maneuver through the ecosystem, particularly in the venture asset class. And it's with a great honor that I introduce our panelists today. I think it's always best when someone describes themselves in their own words. So if Mike, Kerline, and Taylor could get themselves off of video, what I'll do is just have you all introduce yourself, and Mike, after you finish your introduction, then you can volley it over to Kerline or Taylor. So take it away.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Judene. My name is Mike Moïse, first generation Haitian. Definitely always lead with that. I am vocationally a CPA. And I'll just say, sometimes people think that all we do is file taxes through April 15th, and that's not the case. We wear multiple hats. I've actually worn multiple hats. So I've worked as an auditor, for example, at a firm working with big multinational companies. I've worked to help build finance functions at small startups, so 50-person organizations. And right now, the hat that I'm wearing is I'm a consultant for startups all the way from at different stages, so all the way from series to post IPO, helping to build out the financial functions or helping them through different transactions. And that's pretty much it. Kerline?
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Kerline Jean-Louis. I'm an attorney and business coach, founder of KJL Law Firm PLLC. We focus on helping emerging female brands essentially protect their business, get their business affairs in order so that they can focus on getting to the business of business, creating generational wealth, and leaving a lasting legacy. I'm really passionate about social justice, committed to social justice, particularly through economic empowerment. As some of you may or may not know, unfortunately, the average Black family net worth is $17,000 compared to the average net worth of white families in the United States of America, $170,000. So there's a lot that needs to be changed. As you know, on average, women earn 82 cents to every dollar that's earned by men. And I'm just here to help do my little part, put a dent in that, like throw a pebble in the river and make sure, we work towards equity. It can be done in many ways. So I do that primarily through trademarks. Before that, I was a litigator serving underserved and underrepresented populations in court in landlord-tenant, criminal defense, immigration, and child welfare and special education matters. And I'm an Enneagram Type 1. Thank you, Mike. Pass the mic to Taylor.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Tieman. I am also an attorney. I'm an attorney for small businesses, entrepreneurs, influencers. And I'm a mixed baby. I'm half white, half Mexican. So the last name throws you off. That's probably why. And most of my clients are female business owners. I'm really proud to say I have a very set of diverse clients, and I'm so, lack of a better word, passionate about helping them, because I just think there's a lack of education around what's really truly necessary to protect your business, your IP, all the stuff that we're creating. And I've seen way too many business owners just not know how to protect or do things maybe the wrong way, just because we don't always have that going through the bloodline of like how to run a business, how to legally protect everything. So that's who I help. And I have a law firm where I have a legal services membership where I help my clients. But then I also was noticing that just the pricing for attorneys is very high sometimes, and it's sometimes not affordable for business owners. So I also started like an educational platform / library for business owners to be able to access legal resources, learn about what they need to protect themselves. That's also been really fun. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you. I sort of the through line in all your stories is the idea of protection and creating generational change and creating generational wealth. And one thing we love to highlight here at All Raise is, as a collective, we can move things forward. All Raise mission, as Marian mentioned, is to increase the representation of women founders and funders in the ecosystem overall. And we know that in order to do that, we need all elements. We need legal advice, we need tax advice, we need company formation advice, and we need champions in each individual industry to really propel our mission forward. So we're super thankful that you have taken the time out of your day in these Panasonic streets to be with us and to have some real talk. One of the things I like to say is I'm not interested in the performance art of anything. I hope that everyone will bring their authentic selves, and we're just going to answer these questions and make sure that we're serving our community in a tangible way. So if it's all right with you, and I'm also a pastor's kid, Mike and Kerline will probably laugh. So I like audience participation. So feel free to talk with me and we'll have a conversation, and we'll also be looking in the chat. So first things first, where do we start, right? We always get this question of, I am an entrepreneur and I have an idea, right? People like to say that it's not a lack of ideas, but oftentimes it's a lack of execution, right? So if I'm an entrepreneur and I am trying to start, where do I start? From obviously everything in framing of the taxes and legal perspective. I will start with Taylor, and then we'll just go Kerline and Mike.
I think I get the question a lot of like, where do I start? I think being able to access any sort of free resource, like a small business development center or something like that, they're usually very equipped to provide free resources where they can tell you like, look, here's what's up with accounting, here's what's up with legal. If you want more complex paid services, here's where they can kind of direct you. But I really like to point business owners who may not have resources just quite yet. Small business development centers are amazing. They can do a lot of things for you. Sometimes they can even help you with like actual legal documentation. So I love those type of centers. And then also just getting, if you can get your hands on anybody that you know that is an attorney that does handle accounting, that does handle any sort of that basic stuff, asking them, just not being afraid to ask them where they can direct you. Sometimes we can't give free advice all of the time, but we are able to give you information on where to go if you need free, if you need budgeted, if you are ready to work with an attorney. But that's what I would say.
Thank you, Kerline.
Thank you. I ditto everything Taylor said, and I'm not sure if we disclaimed, want to let you know the information that, at least I can't speak for everyone, I'm providing today is for general informational and educational purposes only. Shouldn't be considered legal advice. If you do need legal advice, please contact an attorney about your particular situation. Just have to put that out there. Everyone's situation is different, but I would advise that the first thing that you should do after you get an idea, you kind of have yourself together, as Taylor said, reach out to small business centers, local resources actually here. If you're in the Boston area, the Kirsten Business Center at the Boston Public Library has a lot of great resources, and a large firm, a major firm in the Boston area actually is providing free legal business advice during the panoramic, as Judene mentioned. And I understand when you're first starting out, things may be tight financially, but one thing I would advise you to do is, as Taylor said, reach out to at least an attorney and at least a tax professional. I think it's important, as Taylor mentioned in her introduction, to start your business right and build a strong foundation. You don't want to start building to figure out that there are steps that you missed or things that may cost you more later on. So definitely reach out to a business attorney, definitely reach out to a tax attorney. As Taylor said, pricing may be difficult, but I understand here in Massachusetts, to start an LLC, you have to put up $500 and then pay $500 annually. I'm an entrepreneur. I know when you're just starting, especially in this day and age, you are bootstrapping. But one thing I would just advise individuals is to protect themselves, protect their brand, so that they can build a strong foundation for their business.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have my money on Kerline being the one that issued the disclaimer. So appreciate that. Appreciate that. But no, yeah, same thing. I agree wholeheartedly with what Taylor and Kerline said. I don't really have much to add. I guess to get practical, right? With the network, is LinkedIn is definitely, if anybody knows me, like that's my social media, right? So that's a treasure trove of places to go to access and, you know, find folks that are in the industry that you're in, or can be resources for what you need. So you're never really more than like 3 or 4, from what I found, degrees separated from someone that can help you out or point you in the right direction. So definitely leverage that that platform.
Thank you, thank you. And since I love tangible advice, so for instance, let's role play. I am an entrepreneur. I'm from Los Angeles. Kerline's in Massachusetts. You're also in MA, Massachusetts, yep. Right, Mike? Yep. And I have a large proportion of the Always ecosystem are individuals that are somehow involved in the venture ecosystem. They're either seeking venture dollars and or not. I guess that's kind of how it is. It's binary. I am approaching incorporation, or I'm thinking about incorporation. Like how do I determine whether I'm an LLC, whether I'm a sole proprietor, et cetera? What would be the first question I should ask myself, and how should I maneuver it? I'll go in the reverse order. I'll go Mike, since he's smiling, and then we'll take it from there.
I think Kerline and I have the same thought, but yeah. So this is one of the questions when we talked, right? There's an overlap with like the tax, and then the legal as well, right? So you have to approach, first of all, you have to approach the question from a legal perspective. Legally, what makes sense for me to set up, and then from a tax perspective, that's the type of question you need to ask, right? And I'll say from a tax perspective, if you want to raise money, so I know All Raise is reaching out to folks that may want to raise money at some point in time. If you want to raise money, it's always better. Again, this is not individual advice, but generally it's always better to have a C Corp in place, because you're dealing with equity at that point. And then typically people will advise you to incorporate in Delaware. And that's really just because of the familiarity with the regulations or whatever the case is, and people, VCs especially, being comfortable, and investors being comfortable with investing in companies that are sort of formatted. So that's pretty much what I would say, and how I would say to approach that type of question in general. To start.
What are the financial implications of that? I'll let Kerline chime in, and then maybe you can give us how do we get our budgets together for those decisions?
Yeah, so it's not so much budget, it's more so the equity, right? So if you have an LLC, you can have equity in an LLC, but it's different. It's different than having an equity in a C Corp, for example. So for a C Corp, let's say I'm a startup and I know I want to hire someone, for example. A lot of times startups can't afford to pay someone market salary. So what they'll do is they'll give equity to that person in lieu of the salary, right? So if you want to go that strategy, it's best to have a C Corp in place, because there are certain things that make it easier to either hold on or sell or transfer the shares later on. Whereas with an LLC, there are multiple tax implications that I probably won't get into, but it's way harder, and it's more of what's called a pass-through entity, which is not something you really want to deal with when you're getting into raising money or giving out equity or anything like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Kerline?
Thanks, Mike, for that perspective. And I do definitely think it's important to have both the legal and tax perspective. So if you're reaching out to an attorney and he or she is not a tax attorney, make sure you're working with an attorney who does have a relationship with a tax professional, because they are two different things. And the tax implications for your business are very weighty. They're very important. The legal implications are important as well, but the tax implications are very important as well. From a legal perspective, when discussing business entity and business formation, a lot of times attorneys are thinking about liability shield protection, correct? So you mentioned sole proprietor, and my face went, whoa. We're not doing sole proprietorship. Like if you're running, I don't want to sound disrespectful. If you're 11-year-old running a lemonade stand in front of your house during the summer, you can be a sole proprietor, maybe. Even then, people are drinking, there's liability. People can sue. We live in a very litigious society. So you don't want to be a sole proprietor, because essentially that means you and the business are one and the same. Therefore, if some liabilities arise out of the business or in course of business, that people can come for you personally in your personal capacity for your personal assets, your house, your, whatever, your bank account, your savings, your checking, your funds. Like there's no legal protection as a sole proprietor. You're just registering to do business in your local municipality. So even with sole proprietorship, you're not registering with the state where your headquarters are. You're registering with the municipality. So if you live in Boston, Massachusetts, you're registering with Boston. You're not registering with Massachusetts. I know a lot of people, when they are just starting in business, they think I just need some type of formality. So proprietorship is not, I would advise against it. Again, I'm not providing legal advice, but I would advise against it, because there's no legal, there's no liability shielding. Typical liability shielding entities that individuals discuss are, as Mike mentioned, C corporations, S corporations, LLCs, otherwise known as limited liability. If you're going into partnership, it's limited liability partnership, there's general partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. There's a plethora of entities that you may decide best serve as a vehicle, and you have to think of it like you have a goal. As Mike said, you have a objective. So the entity that you choose, you should think of it as a vehicle to get you where you need to go. Personally, I advise emerging brands, and I'm based in Massachusetts, but I have a virtual law firm. I'm also licensed to practice law in New York, but I also practice trademarks, which is nationwide. But as concerns business entity and formation, that's mainly Massachusetts and New York for me. I advise individuals to start with an LLC. Why, or LLP? Why? Because it's more malleable. It's more flexible. If you are forming a C Corp and or a S Corp, there are certain requirements that you have to make sure to follow annually. So if you're just starting, you're just getting your bearings, you want to make sure that you have a liability shield entity protection, but cannot meet those requirements that are for C Corps particularly are very strict. So like Mike said, you have to, again, it depends on your particular situation. I advise LLCs, if you're a single member or multi-member, you can make an S Corp tax election, which Mike can get into, because there's C Corps are kind of considered, well, double taxation, right? You get taxed on the individual level, and then the business gets taxed. And for S Corp election, you don't get taxed on the individual level. Why is this important? So it's considered a pass-through entity. If you're just starting, you don't want those double taxes to hit. You don't want those double taxes to hit. I'm gonna be honest, I've seen it. It's not fun. Taxes, you don't think about them when you're building your brand. I have these creative ideas. I am so excited to build my brand. The money is real. You do not want to get hit with those tax penalties. So that's why I said, depending on your objective, right? The vehicle that I most likely advise is LLC, because later on, if we do determine we need to change it to a C Corp, then we can do that. It's the most malleable and most flexible. So that's what I typically advise the clients that I deal with. But again, it depends on your particular situation. Thank you.
Taylor, bring it home, sis, because my key takeaways is be conscious, because if the money doesn't reside with you, you're going to have to be paying a lot of cash. So Taylor, let's hear from you.
Yes, and Kerline, I'm going to hop onto your disclaimer because I forgot to give one. So same thing regarding disclaimer, not giving legal advice. But maybe I can give like a real world kind of example with my clients that I have that are founders that like from the get-go and the jump, we know we're going to need investors and we want investors. Legally, usually we're looking at advising some sort of C Corp and maybe not an LLC if they know for sure that they're having investors ASAP. If they're not really sure yet, I'm like, okay, maybe LLC is a good idea. But then where the decision usually turns for the client is honestly based on the tax election and what is impacting them most, because I have a lot of clients that want to bring on investors early. They're good with the corporation, but then they see those California tax rates and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So then they go take a look at Delaware, which is usually more advantageous to them. But then there's legal requirements for even if you're running your business in a certain state, but incorporate somewhere else. So as far as the investments that are necessary to get things started, like we have filing fees in your state that you got to get taken care of. You have to make sure that the tax that's affordable to you too, because once you do file that entity, you are like birthing a baby that you now have to pay for yearly. So keeping that in mind, I think would be the only thing that I would add.
So thank you, Taylor. And can you, and I'm gonna then volley over to Mike to give us just a quick 1 minute on S Corp tax elections. But Taylor, something that I know I experienced was, follow the plan. Both of my organizations, at least one of them is a Delaware incorporated, but in order to practice in California, I had to do a foreign entity application. Do you mind just giving us a quick 1 minute on that? And then I'm sure there might be a similar selection in Massachusetts, but I think a lot of our population might be in California.
Yeah, so I think there's like a common, not like misunderstanding or misconception, but I think a lot of people see that if you're forming an entity, you have sometimes have the option to form in a different state if the tax situation is better for you there, which you can sometimes. But if you do that, you can't always escape your state wanting to keep you being liable here. So with the foreign LLC situation, California does require you to file a foreign LLC, even if you're incorporated in another state, because they want to take your money and or they want to make sure that if you're running the business here, you're still going to be liable for things here. We can't escape wrongdoings that we do in California by just incorporating in another state. So that's something where if a client comes in and they're like, look, I'm going to save all this money by incorporating in another state. And I'm like, hold up, you have to file the foreign LLC here too. Sometimes that changes their decision, sometimes not. If we're at the point that we're looking at like investors already, that's usually not a huge deal because they'll have the cash flow to take care of that. But I think I have a lot of clients come in and they're like, hey, I want to incorporate in Delaware because I heard the tax rates are good. And I'm like, here's all this other information that you might not have heard about. Let's make sure that we have the finances to get all of that started and kind of work our way around that if it's a good situation for us.
Thank you. And Mike, I'm sure you have a comment to that, but then you can hit the S Corp question as well.
No, I mean, I think what Kerline and Taylor pretty much said are all good, and I don't want to stack onto it. And yeah, I would say, I'll go back to my first comment, right? Thing that you always want to ask is, what does this mean legally? And then what does this mean from a tax? And as a founder as well, you're always going to ask, what does this mean like operationally as well, right? So another good reason sometimes to get an LLC is marketing. Like sometimes people won't even take you seriously if you don't have, an Inc. or an LLC tacked onto your name. So that's more of like a marketing branding type of thing, but you kind of have to approach it from these different angles to get the answers that you need. And in terms of S Corp, I was trying to think what like the best way to kind of explain why it's important or why people think of either getting taxed as an S Corp or setting one up. But essentially what an S Corp allows you to do is split the money that you make in the business into two, let's call them just two buckets, right? So one bucket is taxed with, depending on where you live, you're taxed federally and then you're taxed at the state level as well, right? And there are Social Security and Medicare taxes that factor in to what you make. Those are basically taxed on what's called like active income. And what an S Corp allows you to do is split your income by active income and passive income. So both get taxed, right? But one doesn't get taxed the FICA rate. So the 7.65, the Social Security and Medicare that you typically see on your paychecks, right? Those don't come out of the passive bucket. And this is, I think this is sort of like a unique question sometimes, because not everyone needs to do an S corp, right? But that percentage, right, that you don't get taxed on, the more you make, the more you could potentially save. So if I'm making, let's say 40K and I get taxed, at 7.65%, that's a different story than if I'm making 500K and that same 500K gets taxed at that 7.65%. So that's why people sort of do the analysis and say, hey, at what point does it make sense for me to maybe switch some of this income over to passive? And it gets even more complicated than that, because obviously the IRS doesn't want you putting too much money in that passive bucket. So, I mean, even that has some, you have to kind of think through how to kind of split that money up. But that's why that's important. And even going back to the whole entity question, why that even matters to begin with.
Awesome. So quick summary or takeaways that I've observed is being intentional about your goals or your milestones for your company, even from the ideation stage. And being intentional meaning, how do I want to engage with capital? Whether I would love to go the VC route, or I want to loans, or I'm just going to build and I'm going to take it from my savings. All of those decisions will inform sort of which entity you are incorporate under. And for instance, in the cases of a lot of Taylor and Kerline's clients, if you are approaching venture, or you do want to have sort of venture scale, corporation is the way to go. And then always seek legal and tax help, right? I think one of the things you also mentioned earlier too, in the onset of this conversation, is that there are a lot of free or public resources that you can engage with at the ideation stage before or in addition to reaching out for a consultation from a lawyer or a tax professional. I know that everyone on this chat, Taylor, Kerline, and Mike, all have their companies, and they also via their websites, I think you can also sign up for consultations. So that's a resource to you right now if any of this is ringing a bell, and or you feel like you're in a bind, or you just want some advice. LinkedIn, I love that you said that, Mike, because I personally don't look at LinkedIn as sort of my social media, but that is a very, very, very good assessment, and I'll grow up sometime. I'll grow up soon.
I don't do LinkedIn, sorry, that's not where I live. So my LinkedIn page is sparse, don't judge me, y'all.
I know, anyway, moving on. This is a question that we got from the audience, and I would love to just pepper it in real quick. So if you have already started a company and you're about to take on someone under the guise of a sort of sweat equity, on a sweat equity basis, is there a range of sort of sweat equity documents that are required rather than normal company docs? Sort of how do you deal with that in between? Anyone can jump in.
I mean, I could just speak for myself. So I think I'm going to need the lawyers to chime in on the other half of what I want to say. Usually, from what I've seen, when people say sweat equity, there's usually something not legal about how it's structured. I know people do it, but it's just not, it's probably not structured correctly. So I would say this is definitely a good question. I always see documents for equity. And I would say from a payroll perspective, you probably want to be careful, because I mostly see when you're properly reporting, I mostly see some sort of salary accompanied by additional equity compensation, right? So there are documents out there that you could probably, leverage or whatever the case is. But again, I'm assuming this is like a C Corp. If you're in a C Corp, you have to have like an equity plan in place and all this other stuff. So you can't just pick up documents from like Google and just give somebody equity. That's my 2 cents.
Good to know. Listen, let me hear from the lawyers, because, I'm sure a lot of the founders in the chat have heard, and I know I've personally heard that term, and I've seen that go around. And this is like sort of the first time I've heard that they're probably not legal. So legal team, advise / not advise, because this is for informational purposes.
I mean, I can give like with the limited experience I have with this. I had a client that was trying to quantify what her sweat equity would have been of the time that she's put into her entity, and trying to quantify it was so difficult that she just was like, never mind. Because we were trying to get like fair market value for her actual services, and she was going to have to hire somebody to figure out what that was going to be. And she just was like, this is too difficult. So I think if you want to be able to do it and do it right, you're going to have to figure out a way to like get that actual value. I've dealt with it like in that one instance, and it looked like so much of a headache to get it legally all right that she just was like, never mind, I don't want to deal with it. But I think it's a little, not sketchy, but I think it's very hard to lay that out properly in writing.
Can I add something else too? Taylor, thanks for bringing that up, right? So that valuation piece, that the reason that matters is because the IRS always wants their money, right? So if you're giving, just think of it that way. If you're giving someone some type of compensation in whatever form, it's like crypto right now, right? The reason they care about it is because the IRS wants to be able to quantify how much of value you're getting to be able to tax it. And what you probably want to write down, Michelle, is something called the 409A valuation. And the 409A is just a section in the tax code, but essentially you're right, Taylor. There are specialists out there that make a ton of money valuing the shares of a company because it's just super complicated to do. And the reason that matters is because if a company is public, like you have, let's say, Amazon stock, for example, I don't know what it's at, like $3,000, right? So you don't need to value that because the market has already determined how much their stock is worth. So if I give you that in compensation, if Bezos hires me and he says, hey, Mike, I'm going to give you 5 shares of Amazon stock, right? I already know how much money I'm making. It's already determined by the market. But if you're private, there's no larger market to determine that. So that's why you need to, a lot of companies do a 409 evaluation. So that way they can determine how much the stock is actually worth. And that's not something you're gonna even want to do yourself remotely. So thanks for bringing that up, Taylor, because that's actually a big point.
Thank you. I feel like a lot was said, so I'll let Kerline either chime in or we can move on.
Yeah, I think they handled that. Thank you, Judene, for giving me the opportunity to speak.
No problem. I feel like I'm in school right now, so thanks. He's like, fair market value. I'm like, no, business school, can't do it. If you're, sorry, another question that from Emma, if you are an international business incorporating in the US, so you can trade there. I know you cannot incorporate as an S Corp, only a C Corp, but are there any breaks or S Corp type structures available to international businesses? She's a startup in Ireland and beginning to trade in the US. If this is something we can't answer, we'll also be able to follow up with you, or you can reach out to anyone, but I'll give the panelists a chance to answer that question.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna have to punt this. I'm not sure if someone else has experience in that field or can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I don't know specifically. I've only seen via experience that companies will C Corp their way into America. So, and there's reasons for that, right? Like the LLC is pass through. Typically, an international company doesn't want pass through income being flowing to them and then being taxable. But that's not even like remotely advice. But all I've seen is they will C Corp their way into a foreign land. So you want to, in terms of pointing to resources, you want to find a firm or a company that deals with international based organizations, particularly in Ireland, if that's where you're based out of.
To add to Mike's point, not substantive at all, but I would just piggyback on looking for someone who has that international experience. And just a larger theme that Taylor pointed out at the beginning of this talk is you shouldn't only just look for someone to do something for you, but they should also be educating you and empowering you to be knowledgeable of what's happening. It's your business. You should understand what's happening, and definitely make sure you link up or work with someone who's knowledgeable in that field, particularly with the international waters. There's tighter regulation, and it can be a little bit more difficult. So yes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Emma, the All Raise community is large and vast, so I'm sure we'll take note of that, and Marion can reach out to you. So before I go to some more of the attendee questions, I would love to get into some of areas of expertise that I know the panelists have, right? We spent a lot of time talking about where do we get started? How do we get started? How do we use information to guide our decision-making and goal setting, which I think is great. And sort of, and this might be a Mike question, and I'll just let it be a quick aside, is, so we've gone through the ideation stage. Once someone wanted to know, once we hit revenue, sort of what are the effects on revenue in the way that we think about our company formation, right? Sorry, Mike, if I'm.
No, this is good.
You.
Yeah, I think this is good. Mention. So let me, if I understand it correctly, like what happens, what do I have to think about once I start hitting revenue or making revenue?
Correct.
Yeah, so the funny thing is, and I think I mentioned this when we met, right? I think people think it's income taxes, right? Like they think of federal income taxes and that's what dominates the news or whatever the case is. But especially for most people that, you know, I'm not gonna assume I know what the attendees, what industry they're in, but for people that are selling, let's say goods, for example, or they're making things or whatever, selling. And I know, you know, e-commerce is a big thing nowadays. The thing that really kills people is sales tax. It's like this boring concept that people don't really think about. But once you start selling, once you start making revenue and you start selling even across county lines, but definitely across state lines in this new virtual world, what's happened over I'd say the past, say 5 to 10 years is the authorities in these local states or counties realize they've lost the stream of revenue that they typically, the tax base essentially, right? So they used to tax Barnes and Nobles. Now nobody goes to Barnes and Noble, they just get a book off Amazon. So now they can't tax that physical location. So these states and these counties have started to go after people that are selling online, requiring them to withhold sales tax. And I know I've done some work in California. I know California is just a nightmare, right? You have different county tax rates and all this other stuff. So that can, for a founder, that can be scary when you're operating for like 2 to 3 years. And all of a sudden you get a notice from California that says, hey, like you've been selling for this amount of time, you owe sales tax. You're not going to go back to your customers and ask them for the sales tax. So that's going to come out of your pocket. So I see a lot of that. And just to add, like, I don't know if anyone paid attention to the Wayfair. There was a Wayfair Supreme Court case at some point, like 3 years ago, something like that. And that was huge because that would determine if a state was allowed to really tax someone or you know, have someone, you know, take sales tax. So that ended up determining a lot of what the states now have in place, which is this concept called economic presence, let's call it, right? And that just says if you have generally economic presence in my state, in my hood, in my you know, in my jurisdiction, I can tax you even though you don't physically live there. And that's something that's kind of new that you should probably have on your radar. And that's a really good question, Judene, once you start having revenue and selling stuff.
Awesome. And since you're on that wave, Loretta asked a question that I think is interesting. Can you explain what double tax is for California C Corps? And Taylor can possibly chime in here since she does a lot of work in California.
Yeah, I'll defer to California C Corp to Taylor. I'll just say in general, it's as Kerline explained. So when you the vehicle analogy was really good, right? So when you set up a C Corp, the beauty of it is it's a different, the government looks at it as a different entity, like a different being, right? It's a separate entity, right? So that entity is subject to taxes, right? So you get taxed one time, like let's say you're an employee of the corporation, which you typically would be. You'd get taxed normally. The corporation would actually get taxed based on the tax rates. You get taxed based on your individual payroll taxes. That's normal, right? But that money that gets taxed at the corporate rate, at whatever that rate is, right? That money sits, let's say, in a bank account. Now, if you as the owner, if you want to take that out, typically that's done as like a dividend. So if any of you guys have stocks or if you invest, some stocks actually give you dividends every, you know, periodically. That dividend, once you take it out of the business, that is not considered, you know, your typical active income, but that's considered the passive income that you would get taxed at different rates as well. So that's what it means to get taxed twice. So the entity, the separate corporation itself, gets taxed one time, that money that you make, that money then again, once it gets distributed to you, the government says, hey, that's a separate entity getting that money. You are that separate entity. So now we're going to tax you because you're now getting a benefit. So that's why you get hit twice, essentially.
Oh, child. Taylor, if you have anything to say, that just stressed me out. Ooh.
Nothing really to add to that, except for maybe just just a reminder for anybody in California, when you file an entity, you have to pay money to the franchise tax board. So California is very expensive to do that. Here, it's $800 for an LLC, $800 for a corporation. Sometimes you can get those waived right now. Like, for example, there's some COVID relief right now. I understand that there's some waivers that apply for certain types of corporations sometimes, but that's a yearly fee minimum. And then once you're making like $250K, that bumps up to different amounts. So that's one of those things to keep in mind as like just a cost that you're going to have to be prepared to continue paying. Because if you don't pay those yearly, whether you're LLC, corporation, your entity can go legally inactive, which means it's no longer protecting you technically. So that's something to keep in mind too. That's all I would add to that is our outrageous fees.
Yeah, I seen Loretta Jimenez just mention something. And when we're talking about equity, a lot of these things are honestly barriers to access to entrepreneurship. As Taylor was saying, $800 may not be a lot to a lot of people, but from individuals who are bootstrapping, for first generation entrepreneurs, for individuals who really are financially strapped, this is a lot of money. And as Taylor said, it has to be paid on an annual basis. And as Taylor mentioned, even if you incorporate in another state, if you're, as Mike said, economic presence, if you're doing business in California, if you're doing business in another state, you still have to pay money to that state. So I just want you guys to kind of be aware of the things that people maybe who are from lower economic strata, so to speak, or socioeconomic stratas are facing when they are looking to open a business and maybe don't have funding, don't have a network to support them, that these areas of honestly, what's the word I'm looking for, of disenfranchisement, it's really just important to acknowledge that. Again, when I first started, $500 to file, and then an annual fee thereafter it's not cheap at all. So we should definitely be aware of that. And that's also why Kanye West lives in Wyoming, because the tax rate there is 0%. Fun fact.
Okay, well,
to Wyoming.
I didn't even know you moved.
So as a family, we're gonna come together and move to Wyoming, because
we gotta go to Wyoming, 0%.
Loretta, I'm stressed with you, child. I'm really stressed. So Kerline, I was actually gonna volley back to you so you can stay off mute. You mentioned in your introduction, you talked about trademarking, and I would love for you to just simply tell us, what is a trademark? When should you look into getting a trademark? And also, how does trademarking operate in the digital space in general? Like, what are the downsides? Period. What are the downsides?
So as we talked about in the ideation phase of thinking about the legal and tax implications, at the ideation phase, you should also think about branding. Branding, honestly, is beyond marketing. It's the goodwill of your business and or company. So, and it also, branding can also translate into intellectual property for your brand or business. So a lot of times we think about physical assets for our business, like if we purchase a space, if we purchase a company vehicle, et cetera, but we have to also consider the intellectual property and or assets of our business. Kind of to take a step back before we even go into trademarks, there's 4 types of intellectual property, depending on the space and or industry you're in. It may, some of this may apply to you, some may not. But first of all, we have patents. And if you just think about intellectual property, just to define that, that's honestly your creative ideas, things that you create, things that you've thought up in your brain that you are expressing in some form or medium of expression is intellectual property. So when we think of patents, a patent is a grant by the United States government for an invention and or design. So think about if you're in the tech space and you are designing a new wireless charging something or other, a module, you may seek a patent to grant you the exclusive right to use that for about 20 years depending. So if you think about the Apples and the Samsungs, they're filing for patents. And, if you're a Mac fan like me, Macworld is letting you know that, Apple is coming up with this new potential feature because they filed the patent for that, the right to use that exclusively for a number of years. There's also trade secrets. Trade secrets are a secret that your business has. You can think of McDonald's Mac sauce. That's something that you've created, set your business apart. It's a secret and it's particular to your business. So you file for trade secrets. You hear a lot of times that people leave certain companies and they take that secret with them and they kind of maybe sell it to a competitor and there's this litigation. So trade secret is basically a protection for a secret that your firm and or company has developed. Then we have copyrights. It's basically the protection of things in kind of a literary expression. Think a lot of people copyright their books. A lot of music is copyrighted. So that's why the family or estate of Marvin Gaye was able to sue Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams because they claim that their song, I don't remember the name of the song, infringed on one of Martin Gaye's copyrights to one of his music. That's why when you post on social media, you can't really honestly post more than 30 seconds because you are potentially infringing on that artist and or record company's copyright to that song performed by the artist. And finally, trademarks. Trademarks protect your brand. They're your brand name. So a trademark can be any combination of words, phrases, symbols, designs. Think of Louboutin's red sole under that shoe. Someone could be a mile away and they're walking, you see that red sole and you know without a doubt that that is a Louboutin, unless it's a knockoff, it's a Louboutin. Why? Trademarks identify the sources of goods and or services and allow you to differentiate the source of a particular good or service because of that trademark. We see the arched M's and we know that that's a McDonald's restaurant from a mile away. So that's what a trademark is. It's really important because trademarks protect your brand. If you think about going to market, Amazon now is ubiquitous, right? But before that, it meant nothing. You trademark these names, especially if you're thinking of growing, if you're getting investors, because you want to protect your brand. You also acquire certain rights when you trademark your brand name. You're able to pass that on in perpetuity. You're able to license and or transfer the use of that trademark. So it becomes an asset that adds value to your business. That's kind of the short version of what the different types of intellectual property are. And that was a lot. So I don't know if you want to cut in and ask me any further questions.
Yes, I would, we talked about all of the things, but in particular from the ideation stage, what we should be thinking about. And then you threw another wrinkle in that we should also be thinking about trademarking. Can you please let us know? And I know that Taylor does some of this work as well.
Yes. And Taylor, Taylor's a great resource. She actually shows up authentically in the communities that she serves daily. She has the Legalmiga brand, which is trademarked, so which is very honestly creative. Legalmiga, a play on words, her as your legal friend, someone that you can go to for legal advice. And she also is a founder of the Legalmiga library, where she has templates to help you kind of DIY some aspects of your business legally if your funds are tight and you may be on a budget. So all that to say, it's important to do it at the ideation phase, because imagine you spend all this money building a brand, and then 3 months into before your launch, or right when you launch your product and or service, you receive a cease and desist from someone who did the due diligence to file for federal trademark registration, and you're infringing on that person's legal right. It's terrible from a financial perspective. It's terrible from a marketing perspective. True story, I was watching Shark Tank one day, and there was a couple on there who had built a brand of unique dolls. And so they're on Shark Tank, they're about to get an investment from Damon John, right? So show ends. Me being the Enneagram type 1 I am, I go online and I research to see what really happened to this company, because I was sold on their story. They started the brand because their daughter didn't see representation in the dolls in the stores and was crying and didn't love her skin, and they built this this brand, and it was launching. This is a couple that came from nothing, that started the business with literally nothing, right? Come to find out, After they showed up on Shark Tank, they received a cease and desist because they did not do the necessary groundwork. They did not lay the proper framework in their business, and they didn't trademark that brand, and someone else did. And they were fine building until they won Shark Tank, about to get hundreds of thousands of dollars from Damon John. And that brand is now defunct. So that's a true life story of not protecting your brand through trademarks and the result that it leads to. So we're not saying this to hustle you. We're saying to you that you need to protect your brand. You think about the Car Jenners. Every time a quote unquote big name celebrity is about to launch a product and or service, one of the first things he or she does is trademark that brand name. There is important distinguishing factor though. You can't just go snatching up names in the hope that no one else gets them. In order to trademark your brand name and or slogan and or tagline or the name of your product line or the name of your podcast, or a plethora of things that you can trademark, it has to actually be, you have to actually be using it across state lines, as Mike referred to earlier, which is in commerce, or have an intent to use it. It's a process, so you can't drag it out. Another important thing about trademarks is it's kind of like the great equalizer. There's actually a case pending right now where someone alleges that Apple infringed on their copyright to certain emojis, the emojis that diversify skin tones or whatever. So I like trademarks, and there was a business in Boston that had the name Blue Ivy and, you know, fought with Beyonce in court. And it gives small businesses a fighting chance against larger entities that would seek to infringe on their rights. So I also think of trademark protections and intellectual property protections as the great equalizer. Doesn't matter how small your brand is, you have a right to protect that brand name and allow that brand name to last in perpetuity and pass it down to future generations of your business.
Thank you so much, Kerline. And Taylor, I would love for you to chime in. Also, as we mentioned, especially in the pandemic and the Panasonic in 2020, we saw an uptick in e-commerce. Understanding that trademarking is important for all the reasons you outlined. And I also have some horror stories from personal friends who had a similar situation. How do you go about trademarking in the digital landscape? What should you be thinking about? We already hit the downsides. I would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think just existence of e-commerce makes it, I mean, I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, but it makes it a little bit easier to like get your name out there, start a business potentially. There's like a million great platforms that can help you. Like I have a digital store, for God's sakes, and I don't even know what I'm doing with e-commerce. So there's ways to make a lot of money. But it's also, that means so much more visibility and people being able to see you and search you and find you. So just really securing the trademarks early on, like basic, just starting with like name, logo, if that's something that's intricate and important to you. You can boil it down to even like name, like lines of like apparel or products that you're working with or planning to create. But I think it's really important, especially like it kills me with clients that I know have been working towards building and they're like waiting and saving the money. And then I see like a big brand come in and file an application for something, because a lot of what we're doing within our respective cultures is becoming like mainstream cool. And the bigger companies are realizing that, they're trying to capitalize it, and they're filing these applications for things that we've been using for quite some time. So that's probably the most frustrating thing that I see, aside from having to rebrand, is just seeing companies applying for things that we are building and we're just maybe don't have the funds to apply for yet. And I'm just like, oh my God, Target came in and did this again. So that's something that I really stress. Like if you are thinking about what to allocate funds to, trademark is super, super important, especially if you're working with a name that you're like, I don't want to change this at all. I would hate to have to change in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And since we're running up on time and I'm really loving this conversation, I'll let Kerline chime in, and then the next few questions after that, if we could just spitball them, I think that's the term, that would be great.
I apologize not to take too much time, but this conversation is amazing and it's definitely a joy, definitely something that needs a conversation that needs to be had. I wanted to just chime in, just like we talked about in the beginning of working with a CPA, a lot of times people come to you with a brand name that is not strong. So if you have a really unique name, I guess come, but a lot of people fall in love with their name. I saw someone, they just did a lot of stuff. I'm like, baby, when you file for the trademark, it's gonna get denied because it's generic. So you have to think of your business like you're building a team. Even if you're outsourcing, you don't have an in-house lawyer yet. I know someone asked that question. I wouldn't necessarily say you need an in-house attorney at the outset. That's super expensive, but someone who may provide outside general counsel services may be a good fit. But just in the beginning, think about these things, talk to them about tax, talk to them about business entity, and work with them to develop a brand name because that will ensure you greater legal protection.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike, did you have anything to add there? Or
I was just getting taken to school the whole time, so that's good.
we're learning.
I will add, depending on the industry, like for example, with CPAs, right? So for my LLC, I'm actually governed by a board that won't let me, at least in Massachusetts, that won't let me just name my name anything. So I actually have to have my initials as part of the name of the organization. And that's a whole bunch of like, there's a bunch of archaic reasons for that, but depending on your industry, and this probably doesn't apply to anyone in the, you know, any of the participants, you may be limited to what you can name your name. So that's mainly for professional services, but yeah.
So do your research about it, and speak to a lawyer and a tax attorney, preferably, and not preferably, period. Lawyer, tax attorney, tax accountant, and also utilize some of these free resources that are out there. And also, again, we're going to share information for the panelists for you to ask your in-depth questions. So really quickly, and then I'll start from you, Mike. In general, this sort of theme is maintaining our business. So we talked a lot about how we start and protect the business, but now we need to maintain it, right? So we talked about annual taxes. Obviously, those are things that we need to be intentional about it, prepare for. So figuring out the tax implications of your location based on incorporation, but also for cases, and especially with the e-commerce blowing up, foreign entities, what are those legal implications and tax implications, pardon me, and also sales tax, right? Also thinking about that. And I am sure there are a slew of things that we're not talking about, but again, you don't need to know it in your head. Your lawyer and your tax attorney should be helping you, but also teaching you. In general, what platforms are good resources for filing taxes? Thinking from a bootstrapping standpoint.
Yeah, from a bootstrapping, I think this question was asked. I mean, you can use your TurboTax. What I will say, and this is the just rapid fire, the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is just good record keeping. Like your tax accountant is going to take care of stuff, really. And I'll give some practical tips. I love this thing called Expensify. If you're bootstrapping and you just need to scan like receipts, Expensify, I think it's $5 a month. It has like a bot that scans the receipt and you know, logs all the information for you and does your mileage as well. If you do good record keeping, your tax at the end of the year is not going to be that bad. So that's the biggest advice I would give. You don't need to be a technical accountant to know that. Use Expensify or an equivalent and call it a day.
Kerline, I saw your eyes, so I need you to speak when he said TurboTax.
I agree like 1,000% with Mike with good record keeping, good documentation. Please, 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 whatever you do, stay organized and keep a record of everything. As you build, it's only going to get busier and more of a whirlwind. You need that proper foundation. I've seen too many organizations of women-led businesses and immigrant-led businesses that have fallen kaput because that framework was not in place. Good businesses, good ideas. So please do that. TurboTax, I know it's hard when you're bootstrapping, but I personally do not recommend them. We're in the age of legal Zoom and all that stuff, which is great, but each case is particular, and TurboTax is not going to identify all the special deductions and or tips or tricks to maximize your potential refund or decrease your tax liabilities. So me personally, I advise individuals to go to a tax professional. It's difficult, but save up that money, ask them if they have a payment plan. I would definitely utilize the expertise because the money you're not paying up front to use TurboTax, you're gonna lose on the back end. That's what I've seen from personal experience and other people. So I honestly, if you have to do it, you have to do it, bite the bullet. But honestly, I would go to a tax professional. There's some things I would skim other, I would cut some other things out the budget to make sure I sit down with a tax professional who from the jump is going to tell me how to structure my business and move in my business so I can decrease my tax liabilities to the utmost level possible.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Taylor, if you have anything to add You can, or perfect. So
Not
no,
really.
she said no. So we are at time, and I want to respect everyone's time. So I'll pull up Marion and she can close us out. There were some questions that we didn't get to. So what we'll do is see if we can have our panelists answer them and maybe share it in our thank you email, and I'll work with Marion on that. And those questions were a little bit more specifically to the remote age that we're living in. There are any implications from a legal and tax perspective on being a remote company, what we should be thinking about, et cetera. So we'll try to get those over to you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Learned so much, right? Everything they don't teach us in school. And unfortunately, many of us learn the hard way when it comes to financing the dreams we want to build. But thank you again to everyone on the call, our panelists. And I also have a feedback survey QR code. I know the QR codes are the new thing now. So we would love your feedback, and any questions that weren't answered or other events like this that you would like to see would be helpful for us to know, just so we know what are the next big hot topics. We always love to hear from our audience members on what we should be talking about next. And with that, thank you again to our speakers. Such a pleasure to meet and work with you all and just learn so much today. And I will definitely be sharing out the recording with everyone in about 24 hours. So thank you again. It's only Tuesday, so enjoy the rest of your weeks and your afternoons.
Farewell. Thank you.
So much to all Grace for inviting us to speak, and to the panelists and to all the attendees for investing your time with us for an hour. Have a great week.
100%.
Thanks,
Thank
Kerline.
you.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Have a good one.